Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, William, for this kind invitation and also the introduction. So I'm going to talk about this newly published book, Digital Unsettling, Decoloniality and Dispossession in the Age of Social Media, co-authored with Gabriel Dattatreya. So I was just joking that I do not have a lot of visuals because this text has a lot of text, this book, I mean. So presenting this kind of work is always quite challenging because you're actually reading out the text, more or less. But hopefully this reading will help us to get into the topic in some ways. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some slides as pointers once in a while, but I'll also exit screen share and I will just be speaking and I'll be reading out some excerpts from the book. So I'll be switching between the PPT and the actual text from the book. So let me start. For as long as I could, I stayed away from Twitter because of its accelerated temporality, which I believed interrupted the temporality of slow academic reflection, self-critique, referencing, and correction that occurs in loops of forward movement and steps that tread back. A lingering anxiety added to the hesitation. I carry out ethnographic fieldwork among right-wing online supporters. I always anticipate the prospect of being trolled by Twitter warriors online. And now I just lost my earlier Twitter account, so I'm trying to rebuild my Twitter account. Quite frustrating it is. But the reason is, I think we have to scroll Twitter for research data, and we always had to do that. And eventually also to publicize and announce research outcomes, outreach activities, prizes, accolades, complaints, and for a new logic of declaring solidarity through online mentions and replies to colleagues, collaborators, and funders in a digitally mediated citational field. I think this is a new citational logic that has emerged today. During one of those fieldwork days on Twitter, I came across a slew of tweets targeting a senior female academic of South Asian origin employed at a prestigious university in the UK. I'm just going to share the PPT. So, okay, can you see this? Anyone? I cannot see anyone here.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay. So, during one of those fieldwork days, this was there was a barrage of tweets. So I was just trying to see what was happening. The pinned tweet of the academic displayed a compilation of white supremacist rhetoric online. The flurry of activity on her Twitter timeline pointed in the direction of a recent tweet in which she had criticized a best-selling author for his pro-Brexit views, and she criticized him for personally attacking her on Twitter. The academic had called the ideologue, and in no uncertain terms, a regressive retrograde who critiqued academics like her, in fact, with personal comments. And she cited how she was accused of being self-aggrandizing race baiters, and this is one of the words that came up often, for drawing critical attention to the UK's imperial past and present turmoil. After this pro-Brexiter launched a frontal ad hominem attack on the academic with a comment that degraded the merit of her person rather than the value of her charge, there was a burst of tweets and retweets. The episode had the features of trolling, which is persistent provocation through linguistic aggression, which has continued from the days of Usenet groups and mailing lists, but has transmuted as a user category, an emic category, with ambiguous valences in the years after quasi-public platforms like Twitter expanded. So with the help of student researcher Miriam Hermer, I carried out thematic analysis of this event, and I collected comments that were posted in response to 3 distinct tweets from the pro-Brexiter in August 2020. Following this theoretical sampling, we analyzed a total of 702 comments which contained text, images, and also GIFs. The largest volume of thematic categories in the tweet pool drew direct reference to the two key protagonists of the troll event. We can call it a troll event, perhaps, thereby framing this as a battle of two prominent public figures at loggerheads. However, far from being a mere personal mudslinging game, the episode revealed how the figure of a left progressive academic stood as a metonym for the racial other. Nothing more amusing than affluent and upper caste Indians pretending to be oppressed, declared a tweet. I've just quoted a tweet, and I'll be quoting many more tweets in the next couple of minutes. It set the first staging ground for delegitimizing the academics' attention to racism and white supremacy in the UK. Envy for the material affluence of successful people of color was pertinent, but it constituted a small portion compared to a large number of tweets that accused the academic for being a race baiter. As I said, this was the new word that I picked up, who made sure, according to them, I quote, every debate is about skin pigmentation, end quote. Accusations of reverse racism framed a significant 10% of the tweet themes, blaming academics like her for, again, I quote, slamming white people for being white. And they said it's pathetic, awful, extreme woke, a simple projection, and so on. Race baiting implied an instrumental use of the so-called race card and minority super status for self-aggrandizing career moves or for covering intellectual incapacity with a signboard of victimhood. One tweet conferred the title of a race huckster, and this is another term that I picked up. And there was another label, race grifter. The resentment extended beyond this particular academic, as one could see, because for the most part, the tweets represented a deep discomfort for what these online posters believed she represented, a left progressive constellation with universities, organized media, and political parties, in this case, anti-Brexit. A significant 18%, and I'm just going to show another visual, but it's the same data. A significant 18% of tweet themes belong to a category that we labeled academia, education, press. There were plenty of labels to designate them: leftists, globalists, multiculturalists, far left, deriding them as utterly possessed by ideology, spiteful, libelous, narcissistic, hooligans who just want kiosk, people with little self-awareness, and Stalinist. In fact, there were tweets that also launched a string of obscenities, and there were quite many weird expressions as well, and how persons of color desire colonial white man porn and shot nasty comments on their physical appearances. I'm relating all these because some of these expressions are very, very disturbing. And one of the reasons why we repeat them is to show how online discourses can indeed be very aggressive. And perhaps with that acknowledgement, we can have our analysis more responsible. This is the intention behind reading out some of these nasty comments. Territorial boundaries of the nation state were a resource of immense empowerment for those who rallied behind the pro-Brexiter. So a direct objective derision was the academic's resident status in the UK. And one tweeter challenged, why would an anti-colonialist choose to live in the home country of a colonizer? Another commentator said, self-described as anti-colonial resistance and British dissent, they live in the UK. No way they will go and fight the real fight where needed, Africa or Asia, where you have all sorts of authoritarian regimes and imperialism underway through China. Useless people, end quote. And these comments had the exact tone and content of Trump's infamous tweet that criticized four minority congresswomen to go back to countries they came from rather than loudly and viciously telling the people of the United States how to run the government. I'm sure many of you would remember that particular incident. So we found that out of 405, out of the total pool of tweets, 405 tweets and retweets fell into the category of extreme speech because they involved direct personal attacks, vilification, and unverified allegations. So the academic was the target of 81% of extreme speech instances. Left liberals or academics in general were the target of 9% of extreme speech instances, and the pro-Brexiter had to contend with just 4.5% of extreme speech utterances. A small number of tweets that criticized this best-selling author accused him of resorting to petty insults. And one of them added that, remember, in the morning, she'll be a fellow at this prestigious university. You'll be in your underwear writing for the newspaper, end quote. Some charged him for instrumentalizing homophobia to peddle racist anti-immigrant ideologies. And others reminded the Twitterati about his public statements that called for punishment of Muslims in Europe and labeled Black and Asian Britons as never belonging to India, belonging to Britain. Now, we must develop a comparison here with right-wing Hindu nationalist trolling of critical journalists and left liberal academics. With minor tweaking, we were able to retain the same thematic grid we had used for analyzing Hindu nationalist messages to examine the trolling episode in the UK. So clearly, there are these convergences which are very interesting and also quite disturbing. It is interesting to note the tone. Comments against the academic had a thick tone of sarcasm, laced with in-jokes, boisterous shaming, name-calling, put-downs, aphorisms, and sobriquets that displayed familiarity with digitally native jargons that could trend and gain traction, at times expressed in a rhythmic flourish, for instance, rhyming race baiting with clickbaiting. Sometimes even I was laughing, it really makes you chuckle. One tweeter remarked, "I'm surprised the BBC haven't given her a job on woke comedy panel shows," end quote. One more drew a drab comparison with vegans. "Probably she's a vegan, they are miserable," end quote. Restless to frame the ongoing deluge of tweets as British humor, another tweet remarked, "Too bad when her ancestors were colonized, they didn't get any British humor," end quote. So throughout the episode, commentators who firmly stood by the pro-Brexiter and paraded their loyalty patted each other's back, so to speak, on Twitter, exchanging the metaphorical high fives and making merry of the little victories of words and online muzzle power. Enjoying your right post, applauded a tweeter, and there were emojis of faces with tears of joy and thumbs up. And there was one other commentator who said, "I think your forensic takedown of hucksterism is hitting the target. Keep up the good work." So here, I think we see some distinct digital cultures at work. What we might probably describe as fun. In a 2019 article, I argued that fun is a particularly significant mediatic condition for online right-wing cultures. It has at least 4 dimensions. Fun as tactical ways to enter and sustain political discussions, also to dodge content moderation. Deriving fun from the sheer freshness of colloquialism in political debates, which stands in contrast to the serious tone of political deliberation and official centricity, and thereby mainstreaming the witty political campaign styles as an everyday form of political communication. Fun as satisfaction of achieving a goal by working with one's own resources and in finding tangible results such as hashtag trending, virality, and perceived real-world changes. And as group identification and collective, if at times anonymous, celebration of aggression. And in the tweet episode, the troll episode that I just described, we saw several of these features. Online users exchanging online high fives, there were in-jokes, and they were also consciously mocking themselves as jovial. And that sort of self-presentation of being funny is also important in fun as a meta-practice of extreme speech. So one might call this type of analysis close contextualization. When we say close contextualization, we're talking about platform affordances and user cultures developing in relation to one another. However, as this very episode bears out, this type of analysis should go hand in hand with what might be called deep contextualization, examining longer histories of racialization and territorial logics of the nation state. In other words, the enduring structures of coloniality. So in earlier work, building on critical scholarship on global histories of oppression, I propose that coloniality is a global process that reproduces and sustains three interlinked sets of relations: nation-state relations established by colonial power that frame the boundaries of minority, majority, and inside-outside; market relations institutionalized by colonial power now manifest as uneven data relations; and racial relations naturalized by colonial power that mark certain populations as disposable or less worthy. Coloniality of power as a global process unfolds both within and as external forces in different societal contexts. So in the trolling episode, I think it was quite clear. Exclusionary discourses are against immigrants, a category that emerged from the nation-state distinction between inside and outside. Minorities, a category that emerged from the nation-state distinction between majority and minority. They were rife with racialized portrayals and are embedded within market relations manifest today as monetizable data. And this decolonial reading means that vitriolic exchange is not a level playing field of profanities distributed equally among different ideological groups. It is a volatile arena where deeper colonial histories press on the present, allowing contemporary digital communicative forms to affect vulnerable groups in particular ways. In other words, online extreme speech cannot be explained as simply the expression of transhistorical prejudices and hatreds, but it's a specific conjuncture of digital affordances and effects that have allowed colonial histories of racialization, religious majoritarianism, and ethnic divisions to impinge on and violently shape the present. And this is our analytical entry point to the digital. And when I discussed this with Gabriel, the co-author of this book, he brought his experiences and scholarship on campus struggles and contestations around knowledge, other aspects of digital communication. Some of these are hopeful and optimistic. And this book then emerged to advance a decolonial take on the digital, to place the digital in the historical longevity of coloniality. So, to offer a very quick outline of this book, Digital Unsettling, it explores different dimensions of digital communication and how they are connected to contemporary social crises and movements by arguing that the digital is shaped by longer histories of coloniality. By exploring this, we complicate and challenge presentist, liberal, and technocentric readings of the digital. We show how social media is a primary arena where colonial conditions of the present are being contested, debated, and reinforced. Over the course of 6 chapters, we have examined structures and processes that reinforce neocolonial relations within today's digital environments. Our special focus here is on online extreme speech and data colonialism. We stage a number of examples: right-wing attacks against academics and progressive voices, the explosion of racist, anti-immigrant, and misogynistic language on social media, a glimpse of which we saw in the beginning of this presentation, and the ambitions of Silicon Valley capitalists to capture us as data, about which I will talk more later in the talk. So that is going to be the key focus of the rest of the talk. Assessing the digital in relation to the violence of coloniality, we also interrogate how the internet is entwined with persistent calls for decolonization that are flourishing globally as they are linked to material struggles on the ground. Here again, we stage a number of examples: decolonization movements that have shaken the university campuses from South Africa to the US to the UK, to struggles around epistemic parity and citational justice. In assessing this tension, we take a distinctly critical ethnographic perspective. We root ourselves in anthropology, but we also draw on a wide range of intellectual sources, especially critical digital studies and media and communication studies. So how is this take different? The digital as a means of communication, source of data generation, and networked potentiality is an area of growing interest. In fact, digital anthropology might be redundant because there are less and less spheres of life untouched by digital mediations. The digital is a sort of composite expression to highlight the pervasive, almost ubiquitous presence of digital media and communications technologies. and how they mobilize and rework existing networks to shape a diverse range of activities. And these mediated networks do not represent a single technological process or artifact, and they are not mere technological extensions. They are embodied and effective constellations, social media arguably the most visible manifestation. In approaching the internet this way, we complicate ahistorical and media-centric approaches to digital as universal proliferation of horizontal rivalry, and the corollary argument that media networks as machines for producing desire have simply multiplied animosities by converting all users into each other's potential models, doubles, and rivals, locked in a perpetual game of competition for the intangible objects of desire of the attention economy. And this is Schulenberger, I'm quoting him based on Girardian theory of scapegoating. So that's one way that they've been documenting the digital. We say that this kind of analysis is weighed down by methodological individualism that imagines social media as sort of, rendering, again, I'm quoting them, rendering all individuals instantly comparable in simple quantitative terms by embedding users in a standardized format of competition and mimesis, end quote. By highlighting broader structural forces, colonial histories, and the effects and affinities the digital brings together, we move away from methodological individualism, but we also move away from the more optimistic assessment that the simple universal binary code has technologically induced an infinite proliferation of emancipatory participations. So we move away from both these. And in this departure, for us, decoloniality emerges as an important conceptual resource. And decoloniality is a capacious concept. And as Anit Kaur-Handel argues, it is part of a larger archive of anti-colonial thought, the study of settler and non-settler colonial projects and the colony itself, studies of colonial mindsets and attitudes fostered in Native people, and studies of the failures and limitations of anti-colonial nationalist projects. So we thought that decoloniality as a concept was doing many things in relation to the digital. Our interest in the concept and our engagement with it in this text is prompted by three concerns. First, we are interested in animated discussions and mobilizations that the term has provoked in recent years in digital arenas, especially in digital arenas. And we can see this in the context of politics of knowledge and the material conditions of the university. So our first interest is to understand decolonization as a discourse, as it travels across different parts of the world, igniting different kinds of energies. Second, we are interested in the ways decoloniality can be deployed as an analytic for examining the colonial continuities that the digital manifests, and how it reinforces nation-state, race, and market relations I just talked about. Of course, without doubt, as Sharika Thirangama, Tobias Kelly, and Carlos Foment argue, there are multiple genealogies of distinction and prestige that underpin regional hierarchical structures, and which often come to mingle with colonial projects, but are not invented by them, end quote. So conceptualizing coloniality as a set of relations allows attention to the overarching frameworks and historical continuities that undergird contemporary forms of digital action and turbulences as they intersect with regionally distinct hierarchies and exclusions. And I think this point needs to be stressed because decoloniality, when I sometimes propose this, I've been asked some questions about these regional systems of hierarchies and different complex struggles around power. And definitely these have to be documented. That does not mean that decoloniality as a global process is irrelevant. In fact, that's very much relevant is what we are trying to argue. And third, we are interested in the ways that decoloniality can enable a praxis of connection and ethics of responsibility for researchers, what we call a decolonial sensibility, a way to engage in research that utilizes technologies of connection to build relationships beyond the academy, ways to foster new collectivities capable of addressing various manifestations of coloniality. And in doing this, we bring our particular fieldwork-based insights and also collaborative engagements across different projects, but we also bring our own experiential worlds, navigating Europe, navigating North America, and South Asia, where we come from. And we've signposted this by putting our first names in parentheses for different sections in the book. So finally, there are two more aspects about decoloniality and decolonization that we need to consider. When we take up the discourse of decolonization as an object of inquiry, it becomes clear that decolonization has become an increasingly contentious and debated concept. As Bhakti Shrungarpure notes, I'm quoting her, with hundreds of thousands of decolonize hashtags, several articles, op-eds, and surveys on the subject, and plenty of Twitter fighting over the term, one thing is clear: decolonization, all things trendy these days. So the trendy invocation of decolonization is also met with necessary critique when indigenous land-back struggles are either avoided altogether or not given their due place as foundational to theorizing what is at stake in projects that seek to push against coloniality in the present. We should also recognize that decolonization as a symbol and discursive strategy can and has been co-opted to fortify hegemonic power. So as Gabriel and I were discussing, decoloniality as a generative concept, it is provocative in a very important sense, but at the same time, we were also documenting the different disturbing trajectories that decoloniality was developing. So we see this in religious nationalist projects in India. The latest buzzword, in fact, is decolonization. I was in India just last week, just having conversations with people. So aside from nationalism, decolonization is yet another term that they are now using. And this has functioned in this hyper-nationalist project to promote revisionist histories and to elevate Hindu knowledge systems above Western epistemological traditions. This has now begun to frame foreign policy as well, and it's also used as a campaign rhetoric that can help national self-imagining. And therefore, far from generating a consensus around what the goals of decolonization in the 21st century might be, or even what decolonization means and who its central actors are, these struggles, as they are articulated in and through digital networks, might be best understood as arenas where colonial orders are critiqued and challenged by activist students and scholars, producing a form of rupture that is incomplete, inchoate, threatened by the logics of market capitalism, aspirations for individual uplift, indigenous erasure, and the potential for right-wing co-optation, yet holding the capacity to imagine and incite change. And this is the kind of tension that we have tried to express with the term digital unsettling. In the case of troll episode that I spoke about in the beginning, this analysis emerges in relation to extreme speech acts that stretch the boundaries of legitimate speech along the twin axes of truth, falsity, and civility, incivility. In the book, this chapter is titled Extreme. In this chapter, as I briefly outlined earlier, we talk about how cantankerous online cultures are shaped by nation-state relations of majority-minority, inside-outside distinctions, and racial relations that dispose certain people as inferior and subhuman, but also by digital capitalism's industrial scale of interactivity. Market relations, as we have defined in our theoretical model of coloniality. So in the next chapter, which is called Capture, we deepen our focus on the political economy of global data regimes beyond the particular effects around extreme speech they've helped coalesce. So in the rest of the talk, I will read out excerpts from this chapter and wrap up the talk by briefly revisiting the key arguments of the book. I will start the slides again. So the chapter Capture, somewhere in the third or fourth page, there's a quote. Oh, in fact, it's the beginning of the chapter. And I'll read out this quote. It's a very interesting quote. In villages, everyone knew everyone's secret. Then cities made us anonymous. We moved to digital, and now anonymous knows everyone's secrets. This is Kannan Gopinathan. He's an Indian administrative officer known for his sharp and insightful commentaries, especially on social media. And this is one of his well-known tweets, which was also pinned on his profile for some time. When I first came across Gopinathan's tweet, I saw the haunting imagery of moving from the village to the city to the world of data as traces of a pervasive trap. It's a trap of exposure, a condition of being exposed to others without one's knowing or approval, over which one had little control, even when one complied or acquiesced. My mind moved across scenes, instantly evoking my recurring memories of visiting Oxford for the first time as a PhD student from India and walking out of the Pitt Rivers Museum. I had learned some theories and methods in anthropology and had absorbed the idea that any serious student of the discipline would include anthropological museum visits on their compulsory itinerary when they travel abroad. From inside, the museum was unlike anything I had known before. It was stuffed with rows and rows of items, canoes, carpets, clothes, some encased behind glass and some exposed to the thick indoor air. As I walked through the aisles, I struggled to see the reason behind these collections, and I felt a gnawing unease. I strolled around but stopped in front of a small glass cabinet, gazing at what was inside. It was an ornate betel nut cracker. The edges of the two blades had a fine floral motif, and the little piece shone in a mild beam of light. "It is from my village," I protested instantly, in my mind. It was exactly the kind my grandmother back in the village used to crack the betel nuts that were grown in the Adike Tota, Kannada word, the language I come from. It's a betel nut garden. I had seen the soft husk of the betel nut falling on the ground as my grandmother skillfully placed the nut between the blades and gave one hard press to crack it into two pieces, repeating the action several times until the nut broke down into chewable shreds. What odd sequence of events had come together to bring these all the way to the museum in Oxford? Why were they in the glass case? Memories of wading through things that my ancestors could have actually used to crack a betel nut or cover themselves in the rains, or perhaps craft different kinds of callous magic against their rivals in the worlds they lived, resonated with Kannan's allusion to the rural-urban data trap and the condition of being exposed and archived without one's approval. The gushing memories and associations raised the question, what are the blind spots in critical appraisals of contemporary data relations? And how do these appraisals ignore the historical antecedents of data as capture? We saw some moral panic around data in the superhit Netflix docudrama, The Social Dilemma. It came close on the heels of another blockbuster that had set the stage for a critique of the internet, namely the much appraised magnum opus, Surveillance Capitalism, The Fight for a Human Future, the New Frontier of Power by Shoshana Zuboff. Zuboff raised the stakes of the critique by stating that, I quote, "Surveillance capital derives from the dispossession of human experience, operationalized in its unilateral and pervasive programs of rendition. Our lives are scraped and sold to fund their freedom and our subjugation, their knowledge and our ignorance about what they know," end quote. Surveillance capitalism, to follow Zuboff, unilaterally claims human experience as free raw material for translation into behavioral data. Some of this data is applied to product or service improvement, but the rest is declared as proprietary behavioral surplus, fed into advanced manufacturing processes, and fabricated into prediction products that anticipate and predict consumer behavior. This criticism, also voiced by several critical data studies, is no doubt valid, but it does not recognize the historical trajectory of colonialism in which capture was the key modality for imperial capitalism. How then do we map the historical stakes of capture? At the highest level, we might recognize that the very institutionalization of widespread market rationality as forms of capture of land, labor, bodies, and meanings evolved with the colonial project. In its latest manifestation as digital capitalism, market rationality has threatened to usurp life for data extraction, subjecting life forms to a relentless machine of categorizing, plotting, and predicting behaviors to serve market interests. While on the one hand, Zuboff ignores the longer colonial histories that inform contemporary data extraction practices, locating her critique in a Western humanist tradition of lamenting growing capitalization and the loss of human autonomy, Cowdery and Mejia's helpful invocation of colonialism as a way to signal structural continuities leaves several questions around pinning down the precise parallels between contemporary digital capture and colonial knowledge production. And this is something that we have tried to do in Capture chapter. Capture, we suggest, was the very modality through which the terms of seeing the primitives and the non-West as bounded entities that could be observed and deciphered through data collection, collation, and modification were braided with the colonial logics of power in the 19th century. The formative years of anthropology as a discipline in this period crystallized and institutionalized the ambition and acts of capture through systematic data collection without the approval of observed peoples. These emergent traits are, in fact, vividly illustrated by the disciplinary history of British social anthropology. One striking example is the Torres Straits expedition in 1898. So, this particular, retracing of history, especially the history of anthropology, tells us that the trap of what is now called data was spread on to peoples and their lives, lands, relations, and rituals set within environments seen as unmediated and uncontaminated. Early anthropologists defined them as the natural settings and repeated the rationale of colonial science that all observations of people in this so-called natural environment would be for the greater good of progress that knowledge could bestow on their imperial societies. In the institutional history of anthropology, as George Stocking documents, it occurred at a time when anthropologists rejected the skepticism that human feelings, I'm quoting him, are unobservable for scientific research. And that skepticism was getting challenged at that time. And it began to consider social actions as objects of study. So capturing the primitives in their natural environments for knowledge creation and political dominance emerged directly from the conditions of colonial rule and the prevailing intellectual atmosphere in the British Empire that nurtured a utilitarian view that knowledge was something that could be used to manage the nation's resources of people and land. And here, as the historian of anthropology, Henrika Kuklik writes, throughout its formative years, anthropology was conceived to be a useful scholarship. In these years, strengthened by the belief that anthropological knowledge had a utility value for the empire, the practice of observing people in their natural settings settled as a key methodological principle of anthropological inquiry. In fact, even as in the later years, as late as 2011, practical guides for social science research defined ethnographic research as studying groups in natural settings. Here, we could cut to the scene of Silicon Valley social physics documented by Zuboff. The high priests of data science, as she calls them, came up with the idea of unobtrusive wearable sensors and social physics experiments of reality mining that developed from data gathered through ubiquitous infrastructure of mobile phones and combine those data with new streams of information from wearable behavioral monitors, end quote. Zubov goes on to argue that these experiments and inventions led computer scientist Alex Pentland and his collaborators to launch a company called Sociometric Solutions with the ambition to realize behaviorist B.F. Skinner's longed for instruments and methods to study, predict, and modify people's behaviors. Zubov documents that Pentland's collaborator Nathan Eagle told Wired magazine that the reality mining study represented an unprecedented data set about continuous human behavior that would revolutionize the study of groups and offer new commercial applications. Deeper into this inquiry, a study titled Tools for Studying Behavior and Technology in Natural Settings, published by a team of MIT researchers in 2002, promised 3 tools for acquiring data about people, their behavior, their use of technology in natural settings. I've just been noting the word natural settings. Looking from the lens of anthropology's formative years, during which research was conceived primarily as capturing the primitives within observable natural settings secured by colonial conditions, it becomes clear that the ambitions of data capitalists and technocratic research studies today resonate with a similar idea of capturing online users in the presumed unmediated state of nature, as these users express, dodge, confront, collude, buy, and aspire through millions of online posts and networks, leaving behind digital traces that can power up their digital doubles. What is more, electronic sensors attached to bodies or social media affordances would ensure that users are either unaware or offer least resistance. In other words, the aspired petri dish of observable behaviors is the replica of the colonial anthropological petri dish that was aimed at capturing the native in a state of nature. The logics of capture today is now cast much wider, and one could even speculate that today's moral panic is perhaps because it has now squarely hit the metropole. To be sure, there are significant differences between colonial knowledge practices of capture exemplified anthropology and today's data practices. Data capitalists, for the most part, do not employ direct forms of physical violence to extract resources, labor, and time. So, recognizing the arrogance of imperial capture as forms of knowledge should not lead to trivializing the actual violence that accompanied historical colonialism. So in the next sections of the chapter, we discuss the geopolitics of digital dispossession and data relations that intersect with post-colonial fissures as ways to pin down these specific structures of domination and unevenness. But what we highlight in the first section is that there are striking parallels between colonial anthropological capture and social physics practiced by the so-called high priests of the Silicon Valley. And they reveal that not only has there been a historical precedent to contemporary forms of digital capture, although in a vastly different technological setting, but also that there is a continuity in terms of the sensibilities and ambitions powering them. Both industry practitioners and critics have pointed the finger at behavioral psychology, but what we have sought to show in this chapter is that there are unacknowledged traces of colonial anthropology, and therefore contemporary data capture to track, plot, and manipulate behavioral and interactional traces is not entirely new. It has problematic parallels to how anthropology emerged as the science of the colonizer. It is here that we operationalize the concept of capture. To go back to Kannan Gopinathan's quote, I will again share the screen here. In villages, everyone knew everyone's secret. Then cities made us anonymous. We moved to digital, and now anonymous knows everyone's secrets. It sharply puts the imagery of the Indian village and the city on this predicament, the journey from the village where no secrets can survive, to the city where anonymity is guaranteed, but again into the digital where anonymous, the data machine, knows everything. Through the analytics of capture, we take a cue from this backward journey, so to say, showing historical precedents for contemporary data capture. Capture, as we employ the concept here, signals processes of appropriating and disciplining labor, time, meanings, and bodies for digital capitalist accumulation by laying a recursive trap of continuous online engagement that is observable, traceable, plottable, and in historically specific ways, manipulable. So in the next sections, we take this decolonial critique into two different contemporary conditions: algorithmic racism and vast global unevenness in social media content moderation. If we take content moderation as a case study, for instance, we see that there are deep disparities in the allocation of corporate resources and attention given to different regions of the world in terms of addressing online harms. For instance, AI-assisted content moderation is not equipped to handle problematic content in many different languages, leaving people speaking minoritized languages most affected. Even more, content moderation as a kind of scavenging work has reproduced what Sarita Amrute calls racialized hierarchy of digital labor. In the global hierarchy of digital labor, this work is either shipped to third-party contractors in the global south, also to avoid direct regulatory impacts, or to peripheralized corners within the metropole. In Berlin, for instance, some of these call centers, third-party call centers, have a large number of immigrant population. In the final section of this particular chapter, we turn to the post-colonial context in India, where digital surveillance infrastructures are unleashed on religious minorities, perpetuating the core structures of coloniality. So in this way, in this chapter, we advance a decolonial framework that pushes for historical awareness and attention to post-colonial nationalisms, as well as global unevenness in the materialities of digital unsettling. So I just gave you a sort of deeper look into one of the chapters. I started with the extreme chapter, and I talked about how our book is different from other takes on digital. And then I talked a little longer about the idea, the concept of capture. So I will wrap it up now. Spaces of aggression and extreme speech in the online worlds and the political economy of data extraction and surveillance they are embedded within reveal how colonial formations persist, mutate, and proliferate in and through the digital. No doubt, the digital has sparked new hopes around decolonial struggles, but its logics and infrastructures have also been critical in perpetuating coloniality as a set of structural relations. The digital, therefore, falls right in the midst of the mutation and reproduction of colonial relations and very, very energetic calls for and multifarious energies around decolonization. And this tension is what we've tried to grapple with in the book, Digital Unsettling. Thank you so much for your attention.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Sahana. I don't know if there are people that have questions at this point. You may go ahead and raise your hand, or alternatively put them in the chat if you're more comfortable doing that.
I could ask while people are thinking.
Yeah, absolutely, David.
Thank you. Oh, okay. So, Sahana, there's all sorts of things that we could discuss. And while we're thinking of bigger questions, I wanted to take you back to the Twitter storm, the Twitter events that you started with, where you had this really interesting contrast of the Indian case and the English case. And my question is, what happened? And what was really striking about that was that your analytic frame worked in both. My question is, what happens in, say, the Hindi language Twitterverse, and whether the same analytical frame would work for the Hindi language versions of this?
Well, to a certain extent, yes, because what we see on social media are also hybrid forms of linguistic expressions. David, if you could turn on the video, I'll be very happy, because
oh, sorry.
it feels It feels very unreal to be speaking to a screen with no cameras on. Yes, it is true that the framework of, thank you, Daniela, thank you for switching on the camera. So the same analytical framework can work for different practices, and the framework that we have adopted is extreme speech. To think about extreme speech as speech acts that stretch the boundaries of legitimate speech along the twin axes of truth, falsity, and civility, incivility. So it's stretching the boundaries along these two axes. So this is the sort of, definition framework that we have been working on, not just in this work, but also for the last few years now with different collaborators. Definitely there are some language-specific practices that need to be accounted for. But in our data sets, in our samples, we've seen that English and Hindi, and in fact, other regional languages as well, they blend very easily. And these hybrid forms are of great interest for us. There are also concepts that are borrowed and they travel across the globe. I did not show one of the memes where there is a group of Hindu nationalist volunteers surrounding a person, accusing him of consuming beef. And in that meme, they are telling him, are you not understanding the joke? Are you a normie? Normie is a word that is also spotted in Norway and Denmark and the US. So this is a term that's a derogatory term for people who are considered as politically right or derisively named social justice warriors, etc. And the contention is, hey, don't you get this? If you don't get this, then you are a boring normie. So what we are saying is just a joke, and why are you taking it seriously? So that expression of dismissing people who raise objection to these comments has a sort of label which is circulating across the globe. So in terms of linguistic practices, we may notice that there is this global one can even say that there's a global dictionary of abusive terms that keep circulating, right? But at the same time, I do believe that regional languages perhaps offer many different valences and different entry points. And in our data sets, we've not closely looked into those regional language inflections, but what we've really documented are hybrid forms and globally circulated forms.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions? Feel free to identify yourself or type something in the chat. Anybody else? While people are getting their thoughts together, maybe I can just ask one question, which is on my mind, which is really more about methods. And I'm kind of wondering if you could say just a little bit more about data sets and data collection and how you went about that and what might have been some of the focuses that I don't think you said too much explicitly about methods. So I just wondered if you could elaborate that a little bit while people are thinking, getting their thoughts together.
Yeah, I think for different chapters, we have used different kinds of materials. So the idea was to bring out different dimensions of digital communication in relation to decoloniality as our critical conceptual framework. So clearly, you see that in the extreme speech chapter, or what we call extreme chapter, we have different data sets of trolling episodes, of WhatsApp data, of Twitter data. And this comes from content analysis, critical discourse analysis, but also our own navigation. So we've always, throughout the book, we've also embedded our own experiential navigations of these spaces. So that's just the broader point. But in extreme speech, we have these data sets. In capture, we again, raise a sort of commentary around how there are parallels. And here again, we use a whole range of materials, largely also secondary resources, to understand the historical antecedents. We've not really done our own archival work there, and in other chapters as well. But what we've done broadly is to bring these different examples, and we've called this the method of montage. So we place academic trolling among British ultra-nationalists in conversation with Hindu nationalist trolls in India and right-wing anti-immigrant groups in Germany. And we also turn attention to extreme speech moderation practices scattered across Berlin, Manila, and Gurgaon. The force of struggles that have shaken campuses in South Africa, the UK, the US, and online citational practices that draw different kinds of geographies and their knowledges along uncharted nodes of connection and disjuncture. So we are very interested in these connections. And our decision is largely shaped by our training as anthropologists to center particular locations from which we observe these phenomena, places where we have ties and commitments, where we've done our field work or we come from there. And it gives us the opportunity to ground the analysis that the montage as a digital ethnographic method makes possible. So montage is about, bringing these and then the kind of juxtaposition in ways that the historical continuities come to the fore. So that was our intention. But we don't do it randomly, but we do it by rooting ourselves through our experiences as researchers and also as people living in those places. So by locating ourselves in encounters we've had in different places and placing them in historical relief, we offer context to our networked research that extends across events and geographies. And therefore, montage as method also holds the potential for establishing connections between different groups. So there we connect montage method, not just to understand, but also to think about solidarities across geographies.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, the way you discussed that reminded me, maybe very obliquely, but reminded me a little bit of kind of Danny Miller's approach. And in the sense that he is looking at kind of intersections of social media in particular contexts and tends to organize these large-scale projects with people dispatched to physical locations from which they then take a sounding of social media usage or whatever it is they're focusing on. And then somehow re-aggregate into a wider comparative sort of analysis. So I'm just wondering if there's any sort of, you mentioned montage, and maybe that's it. Maybe that is the. I'm just kind of wondering if you've taken any inspiration from methodological inspiration of how to do this, because of course that's always the big issue with any social media, and a lot of what you said reminded me of issues like the field. How do we identify and define the field? Even the relationship between the researcher and the field. What does that look like in a digital? I mean, I'm thinking of a PhD student who finished recently here and had done some research on digital detox in California. So very traditionally circumscribed anthropological study in that sense, a detox camp in Northern California. But of course, once they left the camp, people connected online again, and where I suppose the issue with the field, or one of the issues with the field in that case, is how do you ever leave the field? In a sense, you can constantly be collecting data because you are always connected with your participants and interlocutors. So anyway, there's just a couple of thoughts that came to mind when you were talking about that. Good. Well, thank you. Other questions? Yes, I think there's something in the chat here. I'll read this out. It says, "Hi, Sahana. You mentioned that there are similar online discursive praxis patterns across different languages as a result of globalization. Would you say this cultural/linguistic globalization is also part of the perpetuation of neocolonialism nowadays, going against decoloniality?"
Yeah, great question. Yes, perhaps I have not thought about this in this way, but clearly the very global reach of these large companies and the models that they have built to encourage certain kinds of discussions where even industry voices are telling us that there are models that are actively monetizing polarizing conversations. So clearly, you see the global reach of these corporations and different kinds of algorithmic interventions could be actually leading to a certain way of responding to and articulating politics. So it comes with, linguistically, it may come with certain labels, etc., clearly, but also the formats where fun becomes very important. Fun is a meta practice of extreme speech. It's a common trait across different kinds of contexts that we've been studying, and that's an interesting and important way to understand how this is actually quite global. And that is one part of it. One part of it is about how global corporations encourage, even though not directly, but clearly incentivize through its algorithmic structures and different kinds of mechanisms, a certain way of engaging with political debates and this global circulation of labels and vocabularies. And then you also see that how this kind of exclusionary politics has also taken a global dimension now. Because when I talk to Hindu nationalists, they talk exactly like Trump supporters in some sense, right? So one could argue that this is a new form of neocolonialism, clearly. Yes, I do agree.
Great, thank you. Other questions, either in the chat or go ahead and identify yourself. Yes. Is it Temi?
Yes, Professor Udupa, I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. It's very early here in Seattle, so I'm just sort of processing a little bit slower where your talk has taken us. I happen to be reading Mustafa Suleiman's book, The Coming Wave, at the moment, and I'm noticing he's one of the co-founders of DeepMind, and thinking about, what's happening with AI and the catastrophe that he sees ahead. And what interests me is the language that he used to describe how he has attempted to think through these catastrophes with other tech leaders, and the resistance or the kind of unwillingness to engage in the deep contextualization that you're talking about. Makes me wonder about how this kind of research that you're doing is somehow going to infuse the bigger picture conversation about the future of intelligence and human and more than human interaction in, the years to come. So I was just wondering if you have been having any thoughts or reflections about the future of technology beyond the kind of the digital social media space, but more broadly, how have you been thinking about the future of technology, AI, humanity? It's a big question, but I'm just wondering if you're thinking about it.
Yeah, thank you. So it is indeed a very big question. So, and the way I have approached it beyond this book is also to think about AI in relation to content moderation. And that's a very narrow window to understand AI. But with that narrow window, we've tried to build a framework which is ethical scaling, where we push for people-centric perspectives. And there we take a decolonial critique of AI, and we do it with two different scholars, where the idea is machines replicating rationality is the colonial thinking. And also the moral panic, the inverse, the moral panic also comes from this liberal understanding of humanism, that are human. But who are these humans? What about the distinction between human, subhuman, and non-human that was central to this kind of thinking? Why is that not incorporated? And so I'm trying to argue that both this moral panic around machines taking away human autonomy and the celebration of machine as a model for human rationality are tied to the same kind of thinking. And that with that thinking, you cannot imagine a technology that can liberate us. So you will have to have a completely different perspective, and therefore we've been arguing about community-centric perspectives and our own narrow window of content moderation. And we tried something, maybe we have the time to discuss that as well. What we tried was we collaborated with fact checkers, and we tried to understand the meanings of different extreme expressions, and then gather what is seen as training data set, and training data sets that are context sensitive, that are able to understand whether it is indeed extreme or whether it is exclusionary extreme speech or not, etc. And with this exercise of collaborating with fact checkers, we were able to gather a whole range of culturally nuanced forms of extreme expressions, right? And then they were also telling us how do we even understand the implications of these extreme expressions. And that community involvement led to a whole new way of looking at AI as something that constantly requires our engagement. We cannot just allow this to be dictated by technocrats or technology developers. And the conversations we had among AI developers and ethnographers and fact checkers as community, intermediaries were fascinating. So this is one way that we have tried to intervene in AI debates, by talking about how there needs to be community-centric perspectives around category building, because that's central. How do you build categories? And then based on those categories, how do you build training data sets? That's the second part. And then, of course, with respect to extreme speech, we are also concerned about target groups, right? Who are the target groups? It's only by pinning down the target groups you are able to understand the implications of extreme speech. So with these different sorts of interventions, we've tried to say, what is AI doing? And who is AI? What is it for? And who is it for? So all these bigger questions we can raise, I think, only by carrying out this kind of research through our own research angles. Because to tackle the big question, I think we need to also address particular research angles that will help us to raise and answer some of the big questions that you've raised. And I think overall, if I were to just be, what should I say, adventurous, and if I were to hazard a guess, etc., AI is going to be the reality. Whether we like it or not, it's going to be the reality. So I think we have to brace up for sound regulatory frameworks, and sound regulatory frameworks should come with a different philosophical thinking altogether. If you just try to think about AI as a replica of human rationality with utilitarian logic, we are doomed, I think. We are just going to go there. But then if we take this moral panic, which is what I call liberal moral panic around AI as killing human autonomy altogether, it already positions the West as the center of crisis. And it does not understand unevenness in the way AI and any technology can impact peoples. That global unevenness should also be part of how we think about AI. So those are the two decolonial interventions that we are trying to do through our AI and content moderation project.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamis. Hopefully I answered at least some part of your question. Okay.
Well, if there are no further questions, I think we can probably wrap up the session there. And I know that the speaker has to move along quickly to the next thing. So let's just take a minute to thank everybody for a very interesting talk, lots of food for thought there. And to remind you that we have a full schedule of talks this term, which are all posted on the Oxford Internet Institute site. So please check there. So thanks very much for a great talk, Sahana.